Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to this session titled Built Environment in Africa, the immediate opportunity to build quality, decarbonized, and resilient buildings. All protocols observed. I'm your moderator, Elizabeth Wangeshi-Shege, the Vice Chair of the World Green Building Council and Chair of the Africa Regional Network of the World Green Building Council, where we're the world's largest and most diverse network of green buildings, 4 green buildings with over 37,000 members across 70 national green building councils. One such council is the Uganda Green Building Council, where Uganda is hosting us today. Our impact enablers include 5 regional networks, corporate advisory boards, an established CEO network, and various partnerships. Our collective mission is to catalyze the uptake of sustainable buildings for everyone, everywhere, through our global strategy that aligns strongly with the Sustainable Development Goals and establishes 3 North Star goals: climate action, health and well-being, and resources and circularity. World Green Building Council is part of the global race to zero, which is fast growing as the largest climate alliance, involving stakeholders, including countries, cities, and businesses that represent 50% of the world's GDP, collectively holding real power to drive climate action. A code red for humanity. The recent IPCC 6th assessment report warns of unprecedented and extreme weather changes and the threat of exceeding a key temperature limit. Yet, in 2019, buildings accounted for 50% of total final energy consumption in Africa, and 32% of total process-related CO2 emissions, according to the Global Alliance in Buildings and Construction 2020 Global Status Report. With increasing population growth and rapid unplanned urbanization in Africa, there is mounting demand for buildings. The floor area in Africa is expected to more than double between now and 2050. Over 90% of which will be in the residential sector. The pace and scale of this required hosting housing construction has the potential to significantly exacerbate carbon emissions. At the same time, climate change is already causing extreme heat surges along with widespread drought stresses, which mean the need for climate resilient buildings is also growing. In this race to zero event, we will look at how to avoid locking emissions in inefficient and unsafe new residential construction, whilst simultaneously addressing the huge need for rapid delivery of climate resilient housing from all angles, including policy, how to finance it, as well as tangible practical examples of low carbon resilient housing. I would like to now introduce our distinguished experts, and thank you very much for coming on board. And we'll start off with our keynote speaker, Mr. Joseph Muturi in full, Chair of Slum Dwellers International. He's a social activist and leader of Muungano wa Wanavijiji, the National Federation of Slum Dwellers in Kenya. Moving on to the other panelists before we come back to the keynote speaker. We have Mr. Aklilu Fikriselassie, who is the Director of Thriving Resilient Cities at the World Resources Institute, Africa, and representative of WRI in Ethiopia. We have Sita Shah, who is a Senior Affordable Housing Specialist at Financial Sector Deepening Kenya, shortened to FSD Kenya. Engineer Esther Segero joins us as well. She leads the engineering team at BuildX Studio, a design, build, developer, and B corporation that I'm serving as a board member. Nzambi Mate is the founder of Jijenge Makers, a social enterprise whose aim is to address the need for sustainable and affordable alternative construction materials in Kenya and the continent. We also have Mr. Sadiq Hassani, who is the CEO of Holcim Kenya, Bamburi Cements PLC, the largest cement company in Kenya. Definitely last but not least, Mokena Makeka is a principal in Dalberg Advisors and the owner of Architectural Practice Design Works. a design agency anchored around regenerative environment design. Welcome to the panelists. If we may start with our keynote speaker, who will set the scene and speak around radical collaboration across policy, financing, and innovative construction solutions that have enabled low carbon resilient housing to be built. For example, slum upgrading projects in Mukuru Special Planning Area, SPA project in Nairobi. The Mukuru SPA sets in motion one of the largest informal settlement upgrading projects ever, aiming to transform a slum area of 650 acres into a healthy, functioning neighborhood, improving the lives of people who live there. Please welcome Mr. Joseph Muturi. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Good morning to all of you. First of all, is to thank the organizers for having SDI here. So before I had made a presentation, if we could share it on the screen. So thank you. Basically, just to go through some of the challenges. If you look at the challenges of housing, especially in the urban, one of the things that as SDI we have been trying to do for the past few years is to push the agenda of climate change impacts on informal settlements. I think there have been an over-concentration, especially on the rural, looking at desertification, looking at saving the rainforest, some rivers, some exotic bird. And I think for us is the realization that the impacts of climate change is here, especially in Africa. Initially, we used to see it as something very foreign. So that's what, as SDI, we've been trying to push the issue of and the impacts of climate change in the urban, especially in the informal sector. The other thing we have also been trying to push is the discussion around climate change. It's very elitist. It's very up there. It happens on very high level engagement platforms and conferences and Zooms like this one. But we have been trying to push how do we localize the climate change discussion, especially in the informal settlements. And that's something, given that the traction we are getting, even working with cities, working with counties, we are getting somewhere in terms of resilience. So one of the projects I'm going to be presenting to you was the Mukuru Special Planning Area, which was a first. Initially, we had done it at a very small scale in one of the settlements in Nairobi called Kambimoto, where we did around 100 houses. So those are some of the challenges in terms of the challenges that come as impacts of climate change in informal settlements, the lack of access to safe housing. If you look at the materials bill, if you look at the hazards which happen, if every now and then we are reading in the newspapers a fire outbreak somewhere. If you look at the quality of materials, some use even cartons to build houses. So one of the things also which was a wake-up call for us was the flooding that is constantly happening. With the change of climate, we have these extremely very hot weathers. We have, when it rains, it pours. And most of the time, if you look at all the informal settlements, they are usually on low-lying areas. So all the water in the city ends up in the informal settlements. So people either have to move, they have to devise methods of staying afloat. And this is one of when we are pushing for the SPA and for the county to declare Mukuru as a special planning area, is one of we did a research with Strathmore University and a number of other organizations to identify what are these very peculiar conditions that poor people live in. And with that, they were able to push Mukuru as a special planning area. So what we did, we initially, from the onset, we knew this is a county plan because the county are the ones who have the mandate to declare an area special planning area. The other thing we did, we also looked at SDA, what are our skills? We are very good at organizing. We are very good at mobilizing communities. We also looked at other organizations. We mobilized 40 organizations, civil society organization, academia, local NGOs and international NGOs. And the basis for that was they bring in their expertise, they bring in their resources, they bring in their staff to support county to plan for Mukuru. So, and all these plans were aligned with the county departments and each, if it's the environment consortium, they were under the ministry, under the Department of Environment. So we mobilize organizations like the Stockholm Environmental Institute and a number of organizations which are good in matters, environment and climate. There was a consortium that was looking at the land question. There was a consortium that looking at education. They were looking at other consortiums who are looking at waste management. And basically each consortium was to work with the community. So one of the things that we also noted was when it comes to public participation, the threshold, especially here in Kenya, is very low. The political class, either an MC or an MP will put people somewhere in the hotel and they call that public participation. So for us, we use the Nyumba Kumi model to make sure that all the residents of Mukuru participate in this and support. And basically they were to give, what kind of neighborhood would they want in terms of access to housing, access to basic services like water, like connection to the sewer. So the other thing, there's something we call the poverty penalty, where poor people pay more for services as opposed to other very formal, very rich neighborhoods. So when it comes to water, they pay too much. When it comes to even the use of basic services like toilets, they pay too much. The other thing was to also look at policy. And this is something that probably will speak to the discussion today. So if you look at our policies, yet most of the policies, we inherited them from way back. So if we want to, one of the things, if we want to really address the issue of delivery of affordable, climate friendly and good neighborhoods, is to look at the policy interventions. So from different angles, if you look at taxation, from the people who provide the building materials, for example, giving rebates for anybody who is doing low-income housing. If you look at the zoning, if you look at the land use regulations, and basically just to mention, Mukuru was more of a land use plan. And it's also to look at the building codes. For example, now that the implementation of the Mukuru SPA has started, we were able to negotiate in terms of the roads network, in terms of the road networks, whereby the law says the road should be, I don't know, I don't have the numbers, I don't know, 20 meters. We are able to negotiate and reduce those. We realized if you build a standard road in Mukuru, then if you just build 3 roads, the entire settlement will be gone. So we were able to negotiate the roads from up to 9 meters, some are up to 9 meters to 12 meters. So if you look at Mukuru, we are talking about 100,000 households. These are people who provide informal, who provide labor to the nearest industries there. So, and if you look at the entire 689 acres, one of the things that was also a challenge is all grab land, it's all private land. And the excuse that was being given by the county and the national government is that we cannot touch private land, we cannot put services, we cannot, even the schools, we have over 200 informal schools where they receive 0 support from government. So, and this was to address, number one, the land question and the housing question. We did not want to go the titling way because we don't think giving titles to communities. So for us, we are approaching this on the housing angle, where the government is to push the government to provide housing as opposed to giving in. So lucky for us, when the NMS was created, I think the Office of the President got to know about the special planning area. And one of the tasks that the director of NMS was to implement the plan as it is. So if you look at what is happening now, the before and after, so NMS came in, they have done roads, they have done hospitals, they have done, now we are working on something called the Simplified Sewer, and to push every plot. If you look at the rows, that's what in Mukuru or informal settlement is called a plot. A plot is basically one row of 10 to 12 structures. And if you look carefully, you will realize that there's no toilet, there are no bathroom facilities. Water was also a challenge in Mukuru. Now the NMS has come. They have done a number of boreholes. So the other thing which was a win for us was when the government declared that they are going to do 13,000 houses, and I think a budget has been put towards that. And we are looking at providing housing at scale. A lot of people, I think initially, the magic number for people providing in this space who provide housing, the magic number is usually 5,000 to 10,000. So hopefully, we know the works have begun. If you look at the drainage system, if you look at, this is the reality in Mukuru. If you look at the pipes in the middle of the picture, it's what we call spaghetti pipes. These are the pipes that are used to reticulate water and to provide water. If you look at how the conditions are in terms of where the pipes are passing. So that's why we end up having challenges like cholera because the unsafe delivery of water to residents. So if you look at other pictures, that's raw sewer, and this is a reality. It's every day. This is what's happening every day. So most of the waste, in terms of how they manage their waste, the waste ends up in Nairobi River. It goes downstream. So those are some of the challenges that we are looking in terms of planning, implementing the SPA. So one of the things is a participatory planning processes involving the community. I talked about community participation, civil society, academia, private sector, and the government. And one of the reasons why the SPA is getting traction was, like I said, the community participation. The other thing was to bring in government and to support the Nairobi County in that. And if you look at how civil society or organizations that work in communities, everybody is doing their own little thing at some corner. One organization is providing toilets, another one is doing a water tank. We challenge them to how, why don't we do something that is more sustainable, something, come up with a plan which can be sustainable, which the government can take up, the county can take up and start providing. So if you look at in terms of the work that has been done, NMS is doing drainage. They have provided drainage for the stormwater. Like I mentioned before, they have done a hospital. Like I said before, they are now providing free, clean drinking water to the residents on a daily basis. And the other thing was also, if you look at the roadworks that are going on, was the connectivity between initially when we are working and other organizations that work in informal settlements, we tend to look inwardly. We look at the challenges inwardly. And one of the special things that the SPA came with was also to look, how do we link Mukuru to other areas of the city in terms of the road networks, in terms of the sewer connectivity. So that's what's happening in Mukuru. So for us, the lessons were and I think it's something that is really important, is to look at providing housing right from the planning, where it encompasses, it brings the views of, it looks at infrastructure, it looks at public spaces, it looks at the environment, it looks at safer neighborhoods, it looks at a shift to policy. And I think it also calls for a rethink of how cities or anybody else, a rethink of how we design projects, a rethink of how we design our projects, we implement our projects, and also how we bring other partners, stakeholders, and to look at all the elements that come with creating safe neighborhoods with public spaces, taking the issues of and the challenges of climate change and their expertise who can provide that. So basically that was what was done, and it's what is happening. Hopefully we are looking at the next phase, which is housing. We are also looking at the next phase, looking at the public spaces. There is Mukuru River, where we have started now working with the young people in Mukuru. Basically is to clean up the river and to reclaim the river. They are negotiating with some of the people who have encroached up to the river. One of the communities that we work with or groups of young men we work with in Korogosho called Com Green. We have been taking some of the young people to go and see what is happening, exchanges to see how they are claiming these public spaces. They are planting trees, they are planting grass. And this is something that we want to be replicated across Nairobi River, across Mukuru River. So basically, I think I've exhausted my 10 minutes. Thank you very much. And for more information about the Mukuru SPA, about what we do, you can look at sda.net or the Muungano website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introductory presentation. That's fantastic. We're talking about ambition and we're talking about action. So taking on that initiative and getting it to where it is a huge feat. And one comment from that is we keep hearing, especially around Africa, that 60% of the people in hospitals are there because of communicable diseases that could be avoided, especially around the built environment. And thank you for those pictures that actually show us what's happening on the ground. So moving on to the panelists, I'll start with Mr. Aklilu. We heard from Joseph about the need for large-scale resilient housing. Why do you think that now is such a vital time for African cities? What are the opportunities and challenges that this huge need provokes? I think we've seen some pictures there. And also, if you don't mind adding onto what role do urban planning and development policies play in ensuring low carbon resilient housing is rapidly delivered? Welcome, Mr. Aklilu.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And thanks, Joseph, for this excellent presentation. I just was very much fascinated with the way you presented as well as the actions taken. Thank you very much for that. So this is really a very good opportunity for me also to share experiences and some thoughts. By the way, I can say Africa is in the right position as we speak because urbanization is really fast in Africa, but very low. And I have to say that we are also late as African, late comers for the urban context. So imagine urbanization was the people living in urban was 377 million just in 2000. And now in 2050, we are expecting to have 1.2 billion people in the cities. Imagine the growth. And there are some researches also indicating that most of the, the urban perspective, the characteristics in Ethiopia, in Africa is dominated by slum and informality. Like the one now presented, is the typical characteristics of urbanization in Africa. We have about 60% of the population of the city living in slum. That's really quite a huge number. And informality is everywhere. why informality, I'm mentioning this, it has a lot to say about housing. So this like low level of urbanization, but fast, and being also latecomer has a lot of opportunity for Africa, because a lot has been invested in terms of housing as well. So another area I would like to really touch on is housing is considered as a huge opportunity in terms of job creation. So why this? I mean, Africa is not just urbanizing late, but Africa is a continent dominated by the youth generation. In some contexts, it's like about 70% of the population considered as youth. So these youth are not just youth, they're looking for a job. So housing offers, according to some reports, like about housing investment covers about 6% of GDP. And per one house, you will have a kind of 5 jobs. Imagine, huge investment. This is really a research. And this is also an opportunity, I should say, like for Africa, that is right now. But this rapid growth, and the implication of this rapid growth is also, job one. Another area is our leaders, the African leaders, are in a hurry because this rapid growth is creating a huge pressure in the cities, because African cities are not just dominated by slum, but also most of the cities are unplanned. They are not planned. So because of this, African leaders are very much in a hurry to provide these houses without really considering their impacts on the climate and environment. So with this, the opportunity also, if the African leaders come up with perfect low carbon houses, there are lots of opportunities as well. I have to mention one of the reports of the Coalition for Urban Transition. It was actually launched yesterday. It's like investment in low carbon measures between now and 2050 in Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa generate returns with a net present value of 330 billion. That's a huge benefit if African cities invest in low carbon housing. This is a huge investment in broader infrastructure, actually, and housing, it has a huge share there. But what are the challenges then? Investing in those. Number one is the finance. Cities, require a proper finance, particularly to invest on housing. Some reports also indicate that Africa requires about 20 billion per year to invest like housing. This is housing investment. If we add a little bit of this low carbon investments, and then you can imagine how far that will go. So this is really a critical challenge that has to be addressed. Number two, policies, rules, and regulations. Where are they now? Most of African countries don't have even this broader framework of urban development policies. Even if there are policies, they are really, I should say, they are obsolete with no sense of climate, environment, low cost, and low carbon initiatives, because most of the policies were developed so long, so they need to be revisited. And the last option, challenge I have to mention is the technical capacity, not just to provide housing, building, all those things. If you see most of African cities, highly dominated by these private cities, they are in a hurry, rushing to build houses. But what about this concept of low carbon residential houses? Do they have that capacity to introduce these innovative solutions? No, that requires like a huge effort in terms of capacity building. So these are the challenges, but I can see that urban is a future. Urbanization is a future, and the cities should provide houses, not just houses, low carbon residential houses. Low carbon construction process has to be in place. So for this, Africa, as it is really urbanizing late, there are lots of opportunities, innovative solutions there for us to use. So just one point in terms of like urban development, I don't know how much time I have to check. But in terms of like urban development policies or those things, I have to say a few points on that. The report I mentioned, this of Coalition for Urban Transition, they advocate for compact, connected, and clean cities. This is really a very good package, but what kind of compactness are we talking about in Africa? Because this is a global context. So that is really a key for us to move forward. And in terms of like planning, if you see African cities, how they are planned, they are bounded by what they call planning boundaries. They don't look what's going on. For example, if you see Addis Ababa, where I'm sitting here, if you see Addis Ababa, they don't see what's going on behind Addis, out of Addis. So they are going to offer all infrastructure. They have to think of going beyond boundaries, look at those most processes, because, and also there is no integration between various infrastructure provisions in the cities. You know, all the investments are done, you know, without considering the actions of other sectors. So I can bring one example. For example, in Ethiopia, there is a kind of massive construction of these industrial parks. Imagine what industrial parks means for housing. Like an industrial park that hires about 60,000 workers. That's 60,000. If you are like, if you consider it from African perspective, one person meaning, imagine his mother, his father, brothers will go together. If you multiply that by just 3, you are going to have 180 people in a city. That is a city within a city. Imagine the demand for housing for those people. So when I say planning, a kind of integrated planning, it means all sectors should come together and look at how these actions of various sectors come together, and then should bring a synergy between those processes. So planning is a key to provide, you know, housing and to respond to housing, as well as housing in a way it is really sensitive to climate and environment. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Mr.
When there are questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Aklilu. We'll circle back to you for some closing remarks and pick up a few comments and questions from those who have joined as well. I'd like to now move to Sita Shah. And really, one of the things you mentioned is challenges are in financing as well. So what are the financing innovations that could be done with groups like SDI? And also in addressing that, I understand that the thrust of the FSD network is an open access data platform. Why is this important? How would you convince developers that this would not hurt their competition? Sita, open to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, you may have noticed I had to move since the panel started, and it's because my neighbor had to call water. So we have a water bowser. And this is talking about the challenges of housing and utilities. As we speak, there's a water bowser in my compound, and we need to be very aware that as population grows, we need to provide for people's utilities. And we're already facing challenges in affluent neighborhoods, let alone the more vulnerable neighborhoods, as Mr. Muturi spoke about. So when we think about some of the pictures that Mr. Muturi brought, the flooding, as FSD network, there are a few principles we brought on in creating our network strategy, which was developed with the Center for Affordable Housing Finance and brings together FSD Africa Investments, and FSD Kenya very much as the grassroots player with the relationships. The first thing is financing is there. There's a lot of impact financing, but financing always thinks about the risk, and the risk needs to be mitigated, but we don't have the data. So some of my most interesting innovations or interventions, I should say, are working with both affiliate to Mr. Muturi's organization, Akiba Mashinani Trust, and a large insurance company. We're designing a micro insurance product. We're also looking directly with Akiba Mashinani of how we can give toilets to the to the structure owners. In the pictures Mr. Muturi showed, right? The rows of housing with 8 to 10 structures, no toilets, no washing. And the financing numbers are very manageable, but the data is not there to support that the money will be returned. And so the difference that we want to bring to the ecosystem is to say, we can't tick every box. We can't have perfection. You know, daily pre-COVID, we estimated 5,000 people move into urban areas in Kenya alone. And there isn't a developer in Kenya that can credit themselves that they've delivered 5,000 units in their lifetime, except the very old developers, you know, that have public backing. So we really need to come together. It's building on everything the previous two speakers have said. It's building on the fact that we need closer stakeholder engagement. We need to face realities and say, we don't need the perfect situation. Let's learn as we go. We want to know the challenges of the players we invest in. We don't want to wash it with, it went well, tick, 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 you know, to raise more money. We want to say, this is exactly what happened. We want to be a partner in your journey. So this brings me to a few critical things we've done with the FSD network. First, we pushed rental. The reason we pushed rental, when usually home ownership is the key for housing. Everybody talks about home ownership. But 82% of urban Kenya rents, 90% or more in Nairobi. And rental is where you can talk about green, because you can invest in green if you think your operating costs are going to be low. If you think you're going to recover it over time. But if you're a build and sell model, you may not be the ones, you know, benefiting from it. It should work out in the long term. In the long term, if buyers were thinking about their service charge, etc., they would move to greener units, right? But currently, when we're so much at the start of this journey of delivering cleaner housing, we really, really champion for rental for the reason I said. One is we can build in greener, more resilient housing. And two, we can create the database that rental can be repaid, right? Because typical commercial finance will say we want 10-year leases to finance this. No, in low-income rental, if a unit is empty, it'll be refilled in a week, in a day. So we want that data to show that rental is financeable and then it can exit to capital markets. To speak very carefully about, or just very little about what we're doing with SDI and AMT. So as Mr. Muturi said, there's an innovation they brought to the SBA, and that innovation is simplified sewer. So it's not your big sewers that need a lot of space. It's small sewers, very, very shallow sewers, and it needs a lot of customer education that, you know, waste materials don't go into the sewer, so plastic, paper, etc. And we're working with them to create a financing mechanism for the toilets. But that could also, for the structure owners. So the structure owners don't own the land, but because of the SPA status, the recovery should be possible. And it's very small money, 50,000 shillings could create a toilet to serve 8 to 10 families, right? And that could be repaid in 2 years with 2,000 shillings a month from the structure owner, which is very feasible. Those are the mechanisms we want to bring in place. The same thing could be done to help to put gutters on the roofs, etc. And another innovation that we need to really bring to Kenya is permeable road surfaces. So we really applaud NMS and all the work done in the special planning zone. And it's been a labor of love for SDI for decades, you know. Kenyans know that journey. So now they're there, they're planning, they've brought the stakeholders together, they've got the demand really well understood, they represent the demand. And we can bring in other innovations like permeable road surfaces. So the water doesn't slide off. Every road, every footpath can absorb the water. Even in high-end neighborhoods, we don't need to have parking, you know, that's got the, you know, just tarmac or complete carb road. There are innovations that have like hexagon pieces, and then you plant some grass in between, etc. So we really do need to think about how to bring that in. Maybe I should stop there before we go on, but I want
to
say we can't wait for perfection. We need to just start and gather the data, and that's where the open access comes in. If we know the cost of delivery of the investees we invest in, then we can fight harder for greater impact capital, for incentives like VAT exemption, etc. And we raise the profile of those investees as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, because it actually links to a lot of what Mr. Aklilu mentioned earlier as well, that there's been isolated silo efforts, but the opportunity for open data creates that community and creates the numbers so that, you know, FSD Kenya can actually work with the people and for the people and actually break through that financial challenge where you said there is finance available for impact investing. And I'm so glad you're working with the insurance company and working towards that, that product that will come out. So if I may invite Esther, Engineer Esther, I can see you there. Please tell us what typologies of housing are most appropriate for cross-laminated timber solutions. Can you share some examples? Because that's one of the key leading messages from BuildX, which is B Corp Corporation. And also, if you don't mind, can you describe the supply and demand gap for CLT in Africa, considering locations of sustainable forestry practices and the time these forests take to develop at scale? Welcome, Esther.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Before I just dive into the questions you've asked, maybe I'll just give you a little background on cross-laminated timber and what BuildX Studio is doing in that space. So BuildX Studio is a design and build company that works at producing like radically better buildings. And our overall vision in terms of CLT is being able to introduce mass timber to the East African market. Now, mass timber offers one of the promising opportunities to eliminate carbon in buildings on a global scale because it allows us to do three things. To sink, that is where like trees naturally sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. To store, when you use wood products in buildings for construction, we are guaranteeing that carbon is locked away long term. And then lastly, to substitute, by allowing us to use timber or timber hybrids in construction, we are avoiding the high carbon emission. So this process at BuildX Studio started 2 years ago. We've put in a lot of time in research and feasibility studies with an aim to get to a place where we facilitate the manufacture of CLT in Kenya. And what we've done so far is BuildX Studio has constructed the first CLT building prototype in the region, which is at Tatu City, as an exhibition for visitors to experience and learn about wood buildings. Now, this particular prototype has a floor area of 66 square meters, and then it's a floor to ceiling height of 3 meters, and it has a mass of 13.7 tons. This entire structure, because we don't have CLT manufacturing in Kenya, was manufactured and put together in South Africa by Exlam, and it was shipped in only one container, a 36 cubic meter container. That just goes to show you, like, already it's a great advantage compared to traditional building materials. Now I'll go to your question in terms of the kind of typology of buildings that we can use CLT for. And in terms of strength, CLT has a comparable strength per weight ratio and can therefore, and in most cases, replace concrete and steel in very many aspects. And the fact that it's also a prefabricated system more or less minimizes waste and reduces construction costs, reduces construction time, and guarantees quality. So we've seen CLT in Europe and America used for residential building, for commercial building, education facility, health facilities, and even industrial, because there's hangars, there's warehouses built in mass timber and a mix of CLT. And an example is in the US only, there's over or at least 600 buildings done using mass timber and CLT. Now in Kenya, we see a potential for both residential, commercial and industrial buildings, and BuildX Studio is looking to start setting up CLT demonstrations in Kenya. Now to talk about the demand gap for CLT in Africa, there's a recent study by the London School of Economics, which identified the world's most promising timber markets by 2030. Now, the study ranked countries in terms of potential for both import and export. Within our region, that is East Africa, Uganda ranked 5th on export and Kenya ranked 12th on the import model. Now, this is one of the reasons why in our strategy for the short and medium term, we see the supply for timber for CLT coming in from Uganda, who already have a timber surplus. And then Kenya being the pioneer market in the region, as it has like a fast growing real estate sector, including an existing and growing housing deficit. Then in the long term, there's definitely potential for sustainable timber supply from Kenya, because we've seen some of our partners such as Gatsby really invest in sustainable timber farming and just the growth of the timber industry in Kenya.
Thank you, Esther. That's fantastic to hear about that. And I'm glad you have the prototype available for all to see, feel, and touch, and trust that they can actually build with the CLT timber. Moving on to Nzambi Mate, founder of Jijenge Makers. Could you please tell us about the reason you founded Jijenge? Are you online? All right, Nzambi Mate, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Nice. So yeah, and I'm really fortunate enough to following with my point of view from BuildX, because I think it reaches a point that it's about time, having heard from the previous speakers, we find alternatives, some things that we can both supplement and complement the current way that we build in both in Kenya and Africa in general. There's some things that when it comes to the building space, it's a sector that has not been disrupted for a while. It doesn't mean that disruption is the only solution, but disruption is a way to shift the point of view, as it has happened for example, in sectors like finance, the fintech, and also in transportation with the hailing cab services, just to mention a few. Now, it is with this shift in perspective that we need, so that we can move from the point of view where if it's not broken, why fix it? Coming now into the context of Jijenge, Jijenge is an alternative building product manufacturing company, and our goal is to spearhead both in research and development and production, manufacturing and production of alternative building products. Our first product lines are pavers, and soon we'll be rolling out building blocks made entirely out of recycled plastic waste. Why we decided to tackle plastic waste is, first of all, it's not just a Kenya problem, it's a worldwide problem. Also, it is a problem that it's not only both a systemic problem, but it's also a local problem. And so for us, we wanted to find how can we transfer or take this problem and this material, which is, in my opinion, as a material scientist, misunderstood, plastic waste, and transform it and create an impact in the building space. Hence, Jijenge was founded. And following up the conversation from BuildX with topics such as CLT and different prefabricated building techniques that are coming along, I think we'll be able, once we figure out the different solutions that can be able to work around, it's time now we learn to scale them. And just to reiterate what I think if I'm not wrong, the one who spoke on finance, it's because yes, finance is also a key thing to rolling out these projects and to rolling out these materials in the space. This is because the building or rather the construction space impacts directly to a basic human need, which is shelter. And putting into consideration with urbanization, where residentials are the biggest part of the building needs that we have, I think if we can get really good financing elements that not only support the residentials, but also support the companies that provide these products, I think we'll have a good space, because it's time we figure out ways to unlock carbon emissions, and slowly by slowly, it's not a one-time thing. It's slowly by slowly, haba na haba. But I think with different solutions and with different techniques, we can get there. We can get there. I'll just be optimistic.
Thank you very much. And yes, with the optimism, we already have Jijenge makers and you're on the ground. So I think, thank you for that. And I'd like to invite Mr. Sadiq Hassani to come and give us a few valuable remarks. So Lafarge Holcim is a large multinational company. What role do they play in the affordable housing market in Africa? And also, are you able to give us an example of low carbon resilient construction solutions that your company is working on? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. So as a multinational company, we operate in more than 80 countries in the world. We have initiatives on this key topic in all our regions, from Latin America to India, and of course, Middle East and Africa. And before talking about Africa, I think it's important to learn about what is done successfully in other regions so that we can copy with pride in Africa. So for example, in Latin America, we are enabling sustainable and resilient roads that resist flooding, and it was mentioned by Joseph earlier, with a solution called Agrovial to support local and rural communities. We have also a retail network called Tisenza, where we empower construction entrepreneurs to thrive with the building materials, training and credit support. And we know that financial is an important bottleneck that we need to cope with. In India, we have another solution called Kawash, where we enable water repellent buildings to contain monsoon effects. And by doing this, we protect communities. So back to Africa, we are active in many countries, such as Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria as well, Cameroon, where we have been working in introducing some new technologies. So for example, in Malawi, we have scaled up the use of what we call soil stabilized bricks, which we call Durabrick. And this technology is a substitute of the burnt bricks, which is consuming heat and so on. But Durabrick is of course not using at all any heat, and therefore it is more durable and then more reduces the CO2 footprint. And now we have in Malawi 4 plants, which make it the first low carbon, affordable technology to be really taken to scale. So now talking about Kenya, the country where I operate and I work through Bamburi Cement. So we have launched with the sponsorship of the Holcim Group a project called House of Tomorrow. It was launched in 2019 and with 5 pilot countries, and Kenya was part of them, with the objective to show how the company can the building materials that the company produces can be used to construct a house with an innovative, low CO2 footprint using cement-based materials and also locally available resources. So in Kenya, we had a project where we have had a partnership with the homeowner and of course his local team, and also our what we call Maskani initiative, which is a Bamburi Cements initiative. It's an affordable housing initiative which provides construction advisory services to home owners. So during that project, we worked on the design of the house, but also on the materials. It started in January 2020 and it was completed in December 2020, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. So, as I said, we worked on the design, on the windows, on the use of fresh air and so on. But maybe just to deep dive a bit more on the products that Bamburi did supply to such a project from cement and concrete perspective. So we've worked to provide a mixed design for the concrete using lower carbon content cement, such as what we call Powermax, which is a blended cement with Puzzolana, which is also a material locally available, and also what we call the masonry cement, which is a low clinker content product for mortar and plaster works. So I know that time is running, so I will just conclude that through this project, we managed to save 20% of carbon emissions from cement and the concrete used. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. It's great to hear that there's so much innovative projects across the world, as well as locally in Africa and in the region as well. If I may request Mr. Mokena Makeka, you have your video on, thank you. Can you tell us about the work on the Net Zero Gabon Sovereign Wealth Tower? What innovative solutions are proposed to make it net zero carbon? And also tell us a bit about the lessons from this large-scale, high-profile project that can be transferred to the housing, to the affordable housing market that we've been discussing. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. May I start by first saying that it's a wonderful conversation. Really good to hear from all the speakers. I have the honor of trying to connect everything that has been said. How much time do I have? 2-3 minutes?
Yes, indeed, 2 minutes.
Yes, okay. So let's start first by saying that the zero carbon building in Gabon is for the Sovereign Wealth Fund, but it comes out of work that we at Dalberg are doing with regards to the Good Energies Foundation. And that work is really around looking at the role of the bioeconomy, the growing bioeconomy in particular, and to see how can we both protect forests, enable inclusive economic livelihoods through construction and development, and at the same time address some of the challenges of climate change. So why a sovereign wealth tower and why a public building? Public buildings are one of the easiest ways to anchor the imagination of the population. The way that we design our public infrastructure has a huge impact on the aesthetics and the way that we begin to see ourselves in terms of our residential fabric. That's the one opportunity. The second one is if we think of compact and connected cities, as has been spoken by my colleagues, one of the fundamental challenges that we have is how do we look at residential provision through densification, medium to high-rise housing. Very often in our context, people imagine the house as a sort of single dwelling on the ground. We need to combat the expansion of the urban environment by understanding how can we make dense cities. So verticality and understanding the sort of social challenges that go with that are part of a big way of changing perceptions around housing. Now, one of the interesting outputs of the work that we've done on this particular project was also recognizing that through a high profile tenant, who I cannot name because we're still currently sorting out opportunities, there is a way to get this tenant to replicate this model across literally 200 countries. And this has an impact in all these different sorts of regions in terms of how can zero carbon construction play a different role. This building uses glulam and CLT, so very similar to the presentation by my colleague from BuildX. What we've done with this building is we've taken a typical let's say, concrete and steel structure, done the carbon calculations for what that building would normally emit, both during the construction and during the lifestyle of the building. And we got a figure of roughly a million tons of carbon. We demonstrated by replacing all of the main structural elements horizontally and vertically, and ensuring that we have a sort of different design strategy, that we actually be able to remove 1.5 million kilograms of carbon from the atmosphere. Now, this triggers two interesting conversations. One is that all of a sudden now, by a strategic choice of an alternative building material, you get to tap into blended financing, specifically with regards to green bonds, et cetera. Because now if you can start to tap a carbon credit regime back into the construction costs, not only are you saving the environment, but you're making the traditional, let's call it parameters of the developer, much, much more palatable. Now, if we take that argument further, very often with housing developments, particularly affordable housing, the margins of success are actually so fine. Now, by being able to have another revenue stream that comes into the equation, it does one of two things. One is it can make it more affordable for the developer to accelerate these projects, or alternatively, to see if there's a way that tenants can also reduce their particular burden in terms of mortgage arrangements or rental schemes, because you're now tying those economies right back down to the user. So the excitement here is that by demonstrating that on a public building, if we're able to effectively remove, let's say, about between 75 to 80% of the high carbon producing components of the building, the implications for housing are vast, because even a 3 to 5% shift in terms of the economic modeling can have a huge implication for how we can expand the bracket of who can participate in affordable housing schemes. It also means that investors, particularly in shanty towns and slum areas who are looking at infrastructure finance, who also have very, very tight margins, can now tie that infrastructure back into a sort of reduction of top structure, let's call it underground structure solution. And what's also exciting is a better connection to nature and society. And often people forget this. When you are inside a mass timber structure with wood and other sorts of materials, you have a different appreciation for nature. The net impact of that in terms of the quality of the spaces that we have for housing, for schools, for clinics, for hospitals, et cetera, has a huge impact. So we can suddenly have we can shift, if you will, the quality of the environments that we're creating. And that allows us to tap into job creation. It allows us to unlock a whole other skills regime, because now through transitioning to mass timber, now we will find that our youth bulge, which could be seen as a problem, now becomes a dividend, because now there's a new opportunity for job opportunities and entrepreneurship with this technology. So what's really been exciting about this process is by being able to thread the challenge of efficient urbanization, understanding novel ways of innovative finance, connecting that back to design, and then also seeing how can we connect that all into one sort of holistic solution. So in many ways, the tower is a bit of a proxy, if you will, to test these sorts of ideas, but it's also a test of the state to commit to innovation, which will have implications for building regulations. It'll have a cascading effect in terms of how banks insure those type of buildings, and it will definitely have an impact in terms of the public perception of materials, which for a long time, we've had a sort of traditional suite of brick, concrete, steel. And in a way, we're going right back to more ancient and traditional materials, which were actually better for the planet. So I also find it quite interesting that we're getting back to the circularity of how for thousands of years we built in a way where our buildings were far much more sustainable, and we're getting back to that particular point. And just to also add that the last point is that there is a neat intersection between this and also ensuring that our forests are protected. There is some people have argued that by doing this, you're going to negatively impact on the forest. On the contrary, what you are now going to do is that carbon sinks in forests will now have a greater value ascribed to them. So it'll actually assist with conservation. You can also assist with more economics, because you can start creating, carbon tax regimes and other sorts of incentives that some of the capital laws for community development. So no longer will you have this sort of traditional urban-rural divide where cities develop and rural and shanty towns are left on the edge. You can now actually find a sort of virtuous cycle, if you will, where communities are directly tied to supporting the rural communities, if you will, supporting and interacting and benefiting from urban development. And that also speaks to donut economics, which I strongly believe in, and we need to practice much more of that in the built environment.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's I think you've covered a lot of the aspects, and it's a good thing that you presented last. So you captured a lot of the aspects that have been mentioned before. We have a myriad of questions coming through, and thank you to the panelists. I see you're answering some of them online as well. But due to time, we can't go through all the questions, but what I'd like to encourage is that for the questions that have come through, our panelists can carry on filling that in. And I have the task to very quickly give just final remarks. And most of them are from what you've said. It's just highlighting that we need to raise the level of ambition, and that's already happening, and there's action in Africa. Even if it's isolated efforts, we need to collaborate. And that's a clear message from Joe, from SDI. We've also heard from CITA that finance is available. And also FSD Kenya is working on that micro insurance product that will actually enable use of this finance and de-risking. Esther and Engineer Esther and Architect Makeka on the same page on CLT, and also with Nzambi talking about disruption in the construction sector, which has been nascent for quite a while. So that's fantastic. I'd also like to mention that with Mr. Sadiq, the fantastic innovation that's being done around the world that can be adopted in Africa. And we've seen the work that you're actually doing in Malawi and Kenya as well. So with just those a few remarks, I'd like to remind you that together, we've created a network today, and there's opportunity to actually work together. And that's the purpose of the Race to Resilience. And I see on the chat, the links there for you to be part of that Race to Resilience. Of mention and opportunity to have further discussions is the Africa Green Building Summit that's being held next week, 6th and 7th October, by the Africa Regional Network of the World Green Building Council. And then also we have an opportunity, even if we're not going to COP26, to join virtually and give more input towards the cities and cities regional and built environment day at COP26 as we build momentum also to COP27 that will actually be in Africa. So we need to fully transform the building and construction sector. And the reason for Race to Zero is that we actually get these businesses on board, we get the cities, we get the countries, and it's a great platform to have further action. My last word will be, the Race to Zero is on. Are you part of it? Thank you very much for joining us.